And ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the prosecution is not going to get that man today. No, because I'm going to get him.
This is the Hagmann and the Hagmann Report for today. It's just a wild Wednesday, actually. It's the 19th day of June 2013. This is the live broadcast. I'm Doug Hagmann, co-host along with my son, Joe Hagmann. Together we are in studio, and together we are the Hagmann and the Hagmann Report. Folks, you're in for a wonderful program tonight. 3 hours of unbiased, uncensored news analysis, information that you need to know. We've got a very special guest the second and third hour. I'll tell you a little bit about him now, Mr. Frank J. Bohan, the author of 3 books. Folks, you want to know, many of our listeners are on a tight budget. Tight budget. Oh, goodness. I know I am, and we all are. Every penny counts. But we also want to prepare. How do you do that on a tight budget? Well, Mr. Frank J. Bohan, the author of, as I said, 3 books, Fortifying Your Home, also his latest book, Emergency Air, and another book as well, will be joining us for the second and third hour. To the new listeners, and I've heard from people from everywhere I can think of about North America here over the last several days, including other countries. Well, I want to welcome you to the program. We broadcast live every weeknight from 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern. You can find us on the internet at HomelandSecurityUS.com, and we're simulcast through the good graces of the Christians United Broadcasting Network. There you can find us at the Hagmann and HagmannReport.com. The Hagmann and HagmannReport.com. Hagmann is spelled with 2 N's, and you have to spell out the word and. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us tonight and every night. Joe, welcome to tonight's broadcast.
Very glad to be here. We got a lot of news to get into before we are joined by our guest and the book Emergency Air, author F.J. Bohan, as he said, will be joining us, and I'm looking forward to it. He sent us a book, very practical solutions to many of people's preparations that they wouldn't have thought of, especially the one you showed me, in using a shop vac to filter air in case of some kind of pollution or contamination problem.
I got to tell you, yeah, it's interesting. Boy, and we're gonna have a great conversation. Before we go further, I just want to say this: I had the pleasure of being a guest of Mr. Rick Wiles, Pastor Rick Wiles. Rick Wiles, the infamous Rick Wiles, who's now, by the way, on the radar of Rachel Maddow. Rachel Maddow claims that Rick Wiles is unhinged. Well, together, Rick Wiles and I, me being a guest on the show, we talked about the demonic, the Antichrist being unleashed on the land, the coming persecution of Christians, and how to combat it with the spiritual weapons bestowed to us from Jesus Christ. Folks, you can find that interview to be put up via our producer, but you can find the interview temporarily right now, or you can find the interview on his website, which is trunews.com. That's TRUnews.com. What a wonderful man, Mr. Rick Wiles. Many of you know Rick Wiles.
Obama was speaking in Germany today, and apparently it was very warm there. We're going to open with this. This is a quick clip of Chris Matthews talking about Obama's botched speech in Germany and why it was botched.
Active glass, Chris. What is that? Well,
I think a lot of the problem he had today was the late afternoon sun in Berlin, I think, ruined his use of the teleprompters, and so his usual dramatic wind-up was ruined. I think he was really struggling with the text there. But on the more, I think the headline's going to be balance on surveillance and privacy. I think the
So the teleprompter breakdown, and Obama turns into a bumbling idiot. Can't understand what to read, what to say, doesn't know. I mean, does there come a point when you're president?
Kind of like our broadcast sometimes.
Right. And right, but we don't pretend that we're not stupid, you know. Does it come to a point where you depend on the teleprompter so much to tell you what to say that if they break down, you pretty much are done? You just keep repeating yourself and making odd statements, and it's kind of awkward to see what some call the leader of the world. I've seen in recent days to the leader of the biggest empire in the world, the biggest nation in the world, the most powerful nation, and without something to read from while he's giving a speech, he is like a kindergartner.
Well, I'll say this, and folks, I know many listeners, or at least some of our listeners, have spoken in public, whether it's a church gathering or whatever. But what it was last weekend, or all my days are running together. I think it was last weekend. We were in Raleigh, North Carolina, speaking at the church. And Joe, it's difficult, isn't it, to really, I don't want to say speak in public, but to speak properly and with methodically and without notes, for example, or without little reminders. But this guy's got how many people does this guy have writing for him? And
right. I don't want this to dominate any real amount of time, but I just find it the excuse. It shows his either mental ability or his care of what he puts, how much care he puts into his job, which doesn't seem to be very much. I think, Joe, I really think that he's a cutout. I really do. I think he's a cutout, meaning that I think that his words are not really his words. So it would be easier if they were coming from him. Yeah, and it's important. And I think that this is a prime example. I'm glad you played that. We're going to be getting into Flight TWA 800, some new information that has come out on that today. But first, before we get into that, we're going to talk about Robert Mueller of the FBI. Now, we've said before that there are drones in the air, that they are currently watching you. Well, here is the FBI Director, Robert Mueller, what he said about drones in the air.
Does the FBI own or currently use drones, and if so, for what purpose?
Yes, and for surveillance.
Okay. Does the FBI have any agreement with any other government agencies? Let me suggest a couple. There might be others. DOD and Homeland Security to receive assistance in the use of drones.
I'm not certain. I don't think so. But all I'm saying is that one of the issues with drones, by any use of drones by any agency, is what happens in the airspace. So to the extent that it relates to the airspace, there would be some communication back and forth.
So instead of asking a question, I think I can assume, since you do use drones, that the FBI has developed a set of policies, procedures, and operational limits on the use of drones, and whether or not any privacy impact on American citizens.
Well, we are in the initial stages of doing that, and I will tell you that our footprint is very small. We have very few and of limited use, and we're exploring not only the use but also the necessary guidelines for that use.
Does the FBI use drones for surveillance on U.S. soil?
Yes.
If people are concerned about privacy, I think the greatest threat to the privacy of Americans is the drone and the use of the drone and the very few regulations that are on it today and the booming industry of commercial drones. You mentioned that you use it for surveillance. What are the privacy strictures on the use of drones by your agency today?
Well, it's very seldom used and generally used in a particular incident where you need the capability. I will have to go back and check in terms of what we keep in terms of the images and the like. But it is very narrowly focused on particularized cases and particularized needs and particularized cases, and that is the principal privacy limitations we have.
Okay, there you have it from the horse's mouth himself. The director of the Federal Bureau of Investigations, Robert Mueller, shortly after 10 a.m., began answering questions. He was briefly touching on recently exposed NSA surveillance program that has given the reputation of the U.S. intelligence community a pretty much a black mark. Mueller said 22 agents have access to a mass surveillance database, including 20 analysts and 2 overseers. Also, he came out today and said that drones are being used for domestic surveillance purposes.
We told you this, folks. We told you this, that drones were flying domestically, that we do this way long before, and regular listeners know this. This, by the way, is questionable as to its legality. If you look, these alphabet agencies are out of control. The laws and regulations they pass are completely, totally illegal.
Let's jump back in time. 1 year ago, July 26, 2012, DHS Secretary Napolitano wanted use of spy drones domestically for public safety. This was from 1 year ago on July 26, where Napolitano, in a testimony made available, admit that the U.S. expanded the use of surveillance drones on America's border with Canada in recent years. Now they're letting these drones monitor 950 miles of Washington's boundary line. And it goes on to say, despite growing opposition from the American public, drones largely centered over privacy objections, the U.S. has continually ramped up its drone program in recent years, both domestically and abroad. Now, that was from, as I said, a year ago. This year, now, today, we see Robert Mueller coming out and saying that, yes, they do use the drones for domestic surveillance, but he goes on to say it is very seldomly used and generally used in a particular incident when you need the capability. I really doubt that.
Well, of course, we told you that there are drones flying over all 50 states, certainly over the 48 contiguous United States. We told you this, I don't know, it had to be back in the middle of last year when they denied it. Now they're, of course, saying, oh, yeah, we're doing it. So kudos to us, okay? No, it's the reason I'm mentioning this is because when they say they're doing something, they've been doing it already. Now, here is the issue. Once again, the alphabet agencies, whether it's the NSA, FBI, IRS, they're out of control. They are absolutely beyond any type of they can't be reined in.
The IRS, they have drones?
They've got guns, guys with guns and women with guns that will, in fact, enforce the Affordable Health Care Act. But here's what we need to do. If you look at Article 1, Section 1 of the 10th Amendment, the state governors, they have to start standing up and saying, no more, not now, not over our airspace. This is my state. Get the hell out of my airspace.
Okay. Now that's what they need to do in 1 or 2 states. What about the 40-plus other governors that won't stand up and say no, that will go along with the program because they're scared or that's what they want?
Well, we can identify those people who are the traitors, who are the people who are the seditious actors here in the United States. There are remedies in our Constitution. It just takes some elected state governors and the representatives of the states with some intestinal fortitude to stand up to these tyrannical rulers, and it's going to take courage. Folks, we need these people to stand up with a tremendous understanding of our Constitution, and of course the guts to call their bluff. And if the federal government doesn't, what are they going to do? They're going to war against the states. We have to push back against the federal government, against the federal agencies, against the federal judges. This is no longer a legitimate government.
No, it's not. And we have the IRS. We're talking about the IRS. This out of My Way News and I'll post this in the chat room. Then we're going to get to some Middle East news. The Internal Revenue Service is about to pay $70 million in employee bonuses, despite the Obama administration's directive to cancel bonuses because of automatic spending cuts enacted this year, according to GOP Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa, says his office has learned that the IRS is executing an agreement with the employees union on Wednesday to pay the bonuses. So here we have another case of IRS scandal within a scandal. You already had the IRS scandal, then you had the hotel scandal where they were paying $50-60 million for 3 different conferences. You had them targeting conservatives, Tea Party people. That was another scandal. Now they are going back on a directive that were to cancel these bonuses, giving them to their employees. To Syria. This special report from Reuters: Syria's Islamists seize control as moderates defer. As the Syrian civil war got underway, a former electrician who calls himself Omar built up a brigade of rebel fighters. In 2 years of the struggle against President Assad, they came to a number of 2,000 men, he said, here in the northern city of Aleppo. Then virtually overnight they collapsed. Omar's group, Garuba al-Sham, was defeated by the government. It was dismantled by rival bands of revolutionaries, hardline Islamists. The Islamists moved against them at the beginning of May after 3 days of sporadic clashes. Omar's more moderate fighters accused the Islamists of looting, caved in, and dispersed. According to local residents, Omar said the end came swiftly. Now, the Islamists confiscated their weapons, ammunition, their cars. This group is effectively marginalizing the struggle to overthrow President al-Assad. They're saying it's a pattern that is repeating, not only in this country, but in other countries. Now, Egypt, remember the revolution there was supposed to be a peaceful revolution. It was supposed to bring in democracy. What did it bring in? Extreme Islam. I listened to some statistics the other day. I heard that armed robberies are up 10 times the amount they were under Mubarak. Violent crime was up a very high number as well in Egypt alone. Now we have Libya, which was handed over to Al-Qaeda and their leadership. Now we have Syria. And Syria's taken a lot longer than they expected. Here is a clip on, I don't know if you heard with this, the U.S. is supposed to hold talks with the Taliban?
Yeah, of course. Not only supposed to, they have been for the last several months, at the very least, been holding talks with the Taliban. But you have a clip. Go ahead, play it.
Yeah, here's a short clip. Friend or foe used to hold talks with the Taliban.
4 American troops have been killed in what's being reported as a mortar attack on the U.S. military's Bagram air base in Afghanistan. It struck on the day that NATO officially handed over security responsibility to Afghan authorities, the latest move ahead of a full troops withdrawal at the end of next year. But as insurgents take more soldiers' lives, Washington is setting out to do peace talks with the Taliban. They will take place on Thursday in the group's first overseas office, which has been opened in Qatar. Prisoner exchanges are up for discussion, but the first few weeks are expected to be a case of both sides sounding each other out and putting forward their agenda. More on that now with RT's Paul Scott.
President Barack Obama has described the prospect of talks with the Taliban as an important first step towards reconciliation. Now that is in contrast to this statement in 2009 when the president declared it's impossible for us or for Pakistan to have impunity with folks who kill women and children. Over 16,000 civilians are estimated to have lost their lives in a 5-year period from 2007 to 2012. Now, despite this figure and the thousands of NATO troops who have also been killed, it appears the objective of the invasion to rid the country of the Taliban has not been met. And that raises the question whether the lives lost have been in vain. Now, this quote from Obama last year highlights a shift in thinking. We're pursuing a negotiated peace in coordination with the Afghan government and with the Taliban. We made it clear they can be a part of this future. But it's not just President Obama who has had a change of heart over dealings with the Taliban. 4 years ago, then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said the Taliban poses a mortal threat to the security of our country and of the world. However, before leaving office, she also decided that talking to the Taliban was the way forward. We're committed to Afghan reconciliation. Our only goal is to open the door for the Afghans to sit down with the other Afghans so that they can work out the future for their country. The Taliban have their own choice to make, but the United States is prepared to work with all Afghans. So what sort of country will NATO be leaving behind? Well, at the moment, it's an extremely poor one. Over 40% of the population are thought to be living below the poverty line. And with such a high rate of poverty, the illicit production and sale of opium has become a major problem. Afghanistan sells more of the stuff than any other country in the world. It pumps out 375 tons of heroin every year. Now that is 90% of the world's entire supply. The booming black market leads to accusations of vast corruption. Estimates suggest Afghans paid $2.5 billion in bribes last year.
Yeah, and let me just say something, Aaron. When we were talking at the Conference National Security Seminar in Raleigh, I had mentioned in fact, Susan Price's son. God bless him. God bless Susan Price. But I had mentioned about the Afghan poppy or the opium trade, and I noticed Instapundit had posted an article that appeared in Canada Free Press about our conference and about my mentioning that opium trade. But one thing I noticed was a commenter, one of the comments. You know how people comment on articles. Well, this woman, I believe her name was Laura, was saying, "Oh, come on, there, about the drug trade and this and that." We have been involved. The CIA has been involved in drug trade for a long time, but with different countries and what have you. But getting back to the Taliban, we have the real issue here too is the Afghan government is excluded from the talks. I mean, think about that. It's mind-boggling. Of course, this is a classic lose-lose situation. There is nothing to be gained by negotiating with the Taliban. But this is all part of a large... You can't look at it just at this news clip. You've got to look at the bigger picture. What's trying to be accomplished here? What is this administration... What are the globalist people? What are they trying to accomplish? Well, they're trying to accomplish complete submission to the global governance, and part of that is to create this chaos and this submission by the populace to controlling authorities, include the Taliban, as a stepping stone toward this globalist agenda. And I think that's what people are not getting. This is all part of a larger chess match, if you will.
Okay. Well, yeah, there was a story also that the Taliban beheaded 2 boys in Afghanistan today, so I wonder if this is the same people that we were meeting with. But in the agricultural world, Monsanto executive is among winning World Food Prize recipients. For the first time in 27-year history, a prestigious award for enhancing the global food supply has gone to the creator of a genetically modified crop, a top scientist at Monsanto. The choice is likely to add more heat to an intense debate about the role biotechnology can play in combating world hunger. Robert Fraley, Monsanto's executive vice president and chief technology officer, will share $250,000, the World Food Prize, with 2 other scientists who helped him devise how to insert foreign genes into plants. The announcement was made in Washington on Wednesday, accompanied by a speech from Secretary of State John Kerry. Now, in a separate speech, but this from John Kerry, he outlined a plan that the U.S. military rejected to attack Syria. And we'll get back to the Monsanto story in just a second. But the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry last week called for immediate airstrikes against airfields under the control of Syrian President Assad's regime, specifically those fields it has used to launch chemical weapon raids against rebel forces. This according to Bloomberg Jeffrey Goldberg's report. There has been nothing. We have seen no proof for any chemical weapons being launched or used We haven't seen any proof of anything. Wasn't even the NSA supposed to release the 50 terrorists that they thwarted with their super secret surveillance program where they listen to you from every machine and watch you from everything possible? Where's that report?
Well, this is probably classified. It's hard to really get it. Folks, Syria, what we're seeing is the start of the Third World War. Please understand that. We're watching World War III develop here. Syria is the very epicenter of this Third World War. You're going to see Russian involvement. As I've said, Russia is backing Syria. And, of course, our men and women are going to be fighting not only Syrians but Iranians and even Russians. And this is part of it. So why Barack Obama, John McCain, and al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri, why do they share a common goal? Support the Syrian rebels seeking to overthrow Assad. Zawahiri, think about this, ladies and gentlemen. Ayman al-Zawahiri, Osama, same difference, number 2 man in al-Qaeda, announced his support for the Syrian rebels or the Syrian terrorists last year. That was posted in an online video in one of the, in several of the Arabic language web forums. And he said this. He said, I appeal to every Muslim, every noble free man in Turkey, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon to come to support his brothers in Syria with what he possesses, with himself, his wealth, his opinion, and information. Oh, my goodness. So you've got McCain advocating the support of the Syrian terrorists, which is going to lead us directly into a World War III scenario. This is going to have, folks, the clock is ticking. The clock is ticking.
It's been ticking. Now, the clock is running out. We are seeing things happen across the world that are hard to explain. We have some news on a few Earth events here. We have one of the biggest methane seeps in the world that were found today off the eastern coast of the U.S., North or South Carolina. On the seafloor just off the U.S. East Coast lies a barely known world, explorations of which bring continual surprises. As recent as the mid-2000s, practically zero methane seeps. Spots on the seafloor where gases from the Earth's crust were thought to exist off the East Coast. While one had been reported more than a decade ago, it was thought to be one of a kind. In the last 2 years, additional studies revealed how new areas of seafloor rich in seeps, this according to the Laurel Brothers, a research geologist at the Geological Survey, new technologies have allowed scientists to keep locating new seeps, including one that may be the largest in the world. The findings have changed geologists' understandings of the process taking place beneath the sea floor. These newly discovered communities show that there is much more seafloor methane venting than we previously thought, and that suggests there are many more seeps out there that we do not know about. Now, why is methane important? It is, like Al Gore used carbon dioxide for global warming. Methane is 10 times more heat absorbent. Methane is much more dangerous to our atmosphere than the carbon dioxide or carbon monoxide that's released? Carbon dioxide, yeah. Okay. And sorry, folks, it's a little muffled between us. I don't know why. I hope you guys aren't hearing it, and I don't see any evidence of that. So this, too, there is a new report out of Fukushima, radioactive strontium-90 found in nuclear plant groundwater just off of the reactor in Fukushima. I got a quick audio to play here. Now, this groundwater, or water coming back into the plant through the ground, that is already radiated. So they're not getting fresh water anymore coming back in. They're getting already water filled with radiation coming back to the plant. This is not
poison well.
Yeah.
Now, dangerous levels of highly radioactive material have been found near the earthquake-damaged Fukushima nuclear power plant in Japan. Levels of strontium-90, which is a toxic byproduct from nuclear reactors, have increased 100 times since the end of last year. The new readings are more than 30 times the legal limit. Our correspondent Rupert Wingfield-Hayes is in Tokyo for us. Rupert, is this surprising given what's happened there in that location?
Yes, it is surprising, and it's more bad news for the company that runs the plant and for Japan in general, because what it shows is that the radiation from the crippled nuclear plant, from the crippled reactor,
Oh, that was abrupt, I'd say.
We're having some kind of problem here, but we'll get through it here. TEMCO, the Tokyo Electrical Power Plant, which has been struggling to clean up the plant, said nearly 30 times the permitted level of radioactive isotope was discovered in a well dug last month outside the turbine hall of reactor number 2. So you have cesium levels increasing 100 times what they were 12 months ago. You have strontium levels increasing 30 times what they were, what they are legal in or from last month. The company said it had not detected any rise of the strontium in the seawater. It believed the substance was trapped during the initial 2011 fallout. I mean, how do these people plan to clean this up? It has been, what, 2.5 years since this happened? To one of the biggest storage facilities, I'm sure in Japan, for radiated toxic plutonium, already spent fuel that was stored on the rooftops inside the facilities, and now because of the earthquake, the tsunami that basically caused the explosion, the nuclear explosion that went off in Fukushima, we've had a 2.5 year pollution of radiation into our air, our atmosphere, our water, our soils. This is really what's the word I'm looking for? Corrupting, not corrupting. It is poisoning everything.
Yeah, exactly. We've got a situation that is not going to be resolved easily, quickly, if ever. What do you do with this? And how is this affecting, for example, the west coast of the United States and even throughout the United States or the entire northern hemisphere? Why aren't we hearing about this more from the mainstream media?
What you can't see, what you can't hear, it's out of sight, out of mind.
Well, and folks, by the way, this is why our second hour guest coming that's going to be joining us on the second hour. You've got to hear what this man's got to say, because especially if you live in the West Coast, well, anywhere actually, but with respect to doing things to make sure you're not poisoned, okay, by things like Fukushima. But folks, has everything dropped off the radar? Fukushima, of course, the Gulf spill.
Yeah, the oil spill and the cleanup that has caused many sicknesses with its own experimental chemicals that they used during that.
Out of sight, out of mind. No one's talking about this. We need to bring this back in the forefront, as well as everything else, because we need answers. The government's lying to us. They're not giving us information, and but it's important to talk about.
Not that they're lacking gathering information, though. We know that much. And now,
yeah.
The DHS and Janet Napolitano are seeking NSA spying capabilities. I guess we could have saw this one coming, just like they were seeking the drone surveillance. The DHS now hopes to get same cyber spying powers as NSA. Domestic spying capabilities used by the National Security Agency to collect massive amounts of data on American citizens could soon be available to the DHS, a bureaucracy with the power to arrest citizens that is not subject to limitations imposed on the NSA. Unlike the DHS, the NSA is an intelligence agency, not a domestic law enforcement agency. It cannot arrest those suspected of wrongdoing. That power of the federal government lies with agencies under the jurisdiction of the Department of Justice, the Treasury, and Homeland Security, and other law enforcement agencies. Now, do you guys understand what I just said? The Department of Homeland Security hopes to get the same spying powers as the NSA. The NSA collects massive amounts of data, but cannot use it to go out and arrest folks because it is not a law enforcement agency. Now, the DSA is a law enforcement agency and wants these same powers.
DSA? You mean DHS?
Yeah, sorry, I got a cold or something. I'm all stuffy. I'm not thinking right. The DHS. But you see where this is going, right?
Well, we already have the information sharing between agencies. We've got that. We have, folks, we've got it to the extent that the NSA is just a conduit. Folks, you got to understand this. They are the vacuum cleaner. They're the ones that vacuum up all of the texts and the emails and the phone calls, and they store this information. They're in charge of that. The DHS, the FBI, all the other intelligence agencies can be and are the recipients of the information in the manner it's collected or after it's collected via the NSA. So you've got to look at the NSA as the collection agency and the other agencies as their clients. I suppose that would be a very good analogy to use. But for what? And does the NSA have a charter to spy on Americans? Of course not. Yeah, I mean, Americans texting or calling or talking with Americans from state to state, interstate communication? No, they don't. Yet they are doing just that. And, of course, they're sharing information with the other departments. Now, what we're hearing is folks, you've heard of the saying, it's better to ask for forgiveness than for permission. You've heard of that before, right? Or what is it? It's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission?
Correct.
All right. Well, this is what we see here going on with the government. Now, having the fact that they've already done this, they're engaged in this whole information sharing, gathering, and now they're coming out and saying, it's just like the drone story. You don't think that the drones were flying over the United States last year? Of course they were. We told you they were. With sources telling us they were. And now they're admitting it. And finally, of course, everyone made fun of us when we said, well, they were flying over the United States. Well, you don't have any proof of that. Well, the sources do. You know, our sources have told us that. Well, your sources, you don't name them. Well, of course. See, when we hear news like this, believe me, it's already being done, or has been done, or is in the process of being done. So we really need to kind of keep an eye on things with respect to the authority being granted now to DHS. And remember what Yoda said last night. This is, and I had confirmation of this from my DHS source in Washington. The real enemy, or I don't want to use the word enemy, the real federal force, law enforcement, the real brown shirts are going to be DHS, FEMA, TSA. That's according to an intelligence insider, Yoda. Listen to last night's program again, folks.
Yeah, that was a really good program. We do have an audio. Ron Paul slams sham NSA hearing on Fox. Why don't we ask what's motivating terrorists to kill us? I want to try and play this, as this was a pretty good clip. And if it cuts off, we'll just come back. But this is from earlier today.
Presidential candidate up past, joining me on the phone. Congressman, what do you make of that? This saved lives.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't really believe that, because I think they fudged the figures. You know, of those 50 plots that they stopped, I think 40 were minor plots overseas, for all that we know. So they stretched the point. And even these hearings today were a bit of a sham hearing, because they had already decided what the results would be. But, it wasn't too long ago that the New York Times reported on these 22 threats that they were supposed to have stopped, and 14 of them were orchestrated and started by sting operations by the FBI. So I think we should question, even this one dealing with the subway, I think even the president has questioned that, and he says that we can't be sure that the surveillance was able to stop that. So there's a lot of questions there. They have to try to justify their existence of destroying the freedom and the privacy of the American citizens. Otherwise, they're out of work.
And by the way, they were careful to say not necessarily this particular Verizon surveillance program was what prompted this discovery of this New York Stock Exchange plot. But having said that, they are trying to say it's the yin and yang of this spying on folks, that you have to do things that you might not like just to keep people alive. What does Ron Paul say about that?
Well, even that one major one, there was a lot of good police work that helped there. No, I don't think you have to do that. It's sort of like the old story about you have to burn the village to save the village, right. And they want to burn the Constitution to save the Constitution. And even today, Cole, the Deputy Attorney General, said, well, the Fourth Amendment doesn't apply to this. I mean, where did he get this brilliance to know when it applies and when it doesn't? Of course, the Congress is one that messed it up. They're the ones who passed the Patriot Act, so it's not just the administration.
Well, what do you think of that, Congress? Did the Patriot Act go further than it was originally intended to go, or was this the inevitable direction of an act meant presumably to keep us safe in the Bush years that just got abused in following years?
I think it was both. I think it went way too far. Even if they would have followed all the rules, I would have voted against it. But it's natural to assume that they were overstepped their bounds. Right. So, yes, if we can go to war and do all these other things and throw the Constitution out the window so casually, you better be sure if you give them an inch, they're going to take a mile, and they're always going to paint themselves as heroes. So they have just saved us from all these attacks. But the one thing they don't do is ever ask the motivation for people wanting to kill us. I think we're in danger. I think people want to. I think there's some that would like to do a 9/11. But if you never ask the question, what motivates these people to do this, you're not likely to stop them. That's the first question they always ask if there's a murder. What's his motivation? Does he have a motivation? And that's what they don't ask. We're still supposed to believe, they're going to come over and kill us because we're rich and free and we're nice people, and they don't like nice people, so that's why they want to blow us up. But they need to ask the question, why are they so angry, willing to commit suicide and come over here and kill us? And if we don't ask that question, we can't ever stop these problems by just taking more liberties away from the American people. We're going in the opposite way. We've taken away the Constitution. We're supposed to be over there fighting to save our Constitution.
All right.
It's completely turned on its head.
All right, I'll put you down as a maybe on there.
All right, there was Ron Paul talking about the unconstitutionality and the just overall lack of real thought behind what they did with the Patriot Act, how it really was built for, and he doesn't go this far, but you can take it away from what he said, that it was built to go after all the American citizens and collect all this data, not just people they posted up as bad guys and said, these are the people that we're going to surveil. Two pieces of quick news, then we're going to get into the TWA Flight 800 information before we bring our guest on, the author of Emergency Air, F.J. Bohan. This first piece of news, there is gun dealers are having problems with credit card processors again. This was reported earlier in the year, but MasterCard and now on the list apparently of credit card companies that are having problems running purchase orders for guns, as we see credit cards not being able to be used in gun purchases, which is, I would say, illegal, although they do own their own company. It's kind of hard to give somebody a credit card and say, here, it's your money if you want to borrow it, but you just can't buy what we don't want you to buy with it, or what the government doesn't want you to buy with it. And in some good news, in Pennsylvania yesterday, Governor Tom Corbett signed a bill that allows the state to opt out of abortion coverage in health care exchanges. No Obamacare-funded abortions in Pennsylvania after Governor Tom Corbett signed the bill. This is from Mackay Bliger of the Pennsylvania Pro-Life Federation. Under Obamacare, these health insurance exchanges, which is where people will go to buy insurance, must cover abortions unless the states opt out. And these exchanges are funded with our tax dollars. Although the ban does not restrict access to abortion, it definitely doesn't. It definitely helps, as many people strongly oppose their taxpayer dollars being lent or given to fund abortions, and that will not be happening here in Pennsylvania, as so many feared would happen. Now, TWA Flight 800. I'm not sure how old when this happened. Say 17 years ago, so I was 13. There was I remember this. My dad always said this plane was blown up.
Indeed. I remember this well. In fact, it was in New York City around that time, and in fact, on Long Island around that, not on the day, but near that, around the time, and my partner at the time and I were talking about this incident and how this morphed from just how this investigation was from the top destroyed. You know, it was on July 17th, 1996. 230 people on board TWA Flight 800, 53 of them TWA employees, 19 crew members, and the rest of the people just catching a 6-hour ride to Paris. The pilot was Captain Ralph Kevorkian of Garden Grove, California. He was an Air Force veteran who had been TWA since 1965. He had logged more than 5,000 hours in the 747, either as co-captain or part of the crew. Perfect safety record, as did his co-captain Steve Snyder, and so on. I mean, very experienced crew. But, you know, I recall that night it being peaceful, very quiet, pleasant, 71-degree summer night. Stress. It was in appearances and deceive. That evening of July 17th was definitely not as peaceful as it appeared to be. The signs of unease, if you recall that year, folks, were everywhere, and even some beneath the surface. You know, people like Dean Stewart, a witness to. Now, this is not in today's news or this year's news, but people like Dean Stewart observed some signs earlier in the day at Gilgo State Park, where he and his friend Susan Smith were enjoying the day off, and saw something odd off the coast of Long Island. What?
I have a question about this. What would be the motive for shooting this plane down?
Well, it's a good question. Some say it was an errant Navy missile that struck TWA 800. Some say it was a missile by one of our enemies, in particular Iran. Jack Cashel and James Sanders wrote the book First Strike, TWA Flight 800 and the Attack on America this is back, I think, when was this book written here? I've got a copy of it in my hand. I think he wrote this back in 2000. In fact, it was 2003. Now, there are a couple of different theories offered in this book, including there was another target in the sky. It depends on who you ask. For example, many people are very familiar with Yosef Bodansky, counterterrorism expert. Yosef Bodansky has his theories. One thing that I can say is the story, obviously, folks, the story of TWA Flight 800, it was not the center fuel tank explosion. There's never been, before or since, any type of explosion or event that would indicate that. But the fact is this: July 17th, 1996 was certainly not any ordinary day. You've got to remember, think back, because 2 days before the opening ceremony of the Atlanta Olympics and 3 weeks after the Khobar Tower bombing in Saudi Arabia, The United States military was entirely vigilant, quietly, of course. Clinton had placed the country on the highest state of alert since the Cuban Missile Crisis during that time, yet everything appeared normal. You've got to understand, you've got to go back in time during that election year, folks, and understand what was taking place during that election year. You've got to see that peace and prosperity was, in fact, the words of the day. What we're going to do as the anniversary to the event draws closer, we're going to be talking more in detail about TWA Flight 800, about people like FBI agent Alstrom and others who were involved, Jamie Gorelick, the Clintons, and others who were involved in the cover-up of this. I don't even want to use the word tragedy, but I suppose that's what it was. Many people had been affected by that, and of course, the investigation. Remember, folks, the diagram of the plane after the alleged explosion actually gaining in altitude. Yeah. Circumstantial evidence, at the very least, would create a prima facie case that TWA Flight 800 was brought down not by any type of explosion inside, but by a missile. And that's, but where did the missile come from? Well, we'll be talking about that more on a different program as we get closer to the day.
Yeah, no, I just want to address this real quick. This isn't news or anything like that, but somebody in the chat room said how they were real tired, and I said, yeah, I'm tired too, and there's about 10 responses, people saying they're tired. I was talking with somebody earlier about people feeling like they're in a negative mood, almost like a depression, and it seemed that there was a lot of people going through this right now. Do you remember last night after the show we went outside and we watched some weird thing fly right above our heads with no sound?
Yeah, it was actually, folks. It was kind of interesting. Just imagine a light like a. It was pretty large too. I don't know. It would, if you stuck your arm out in front of your, extended your arm as far as you could and looked at your thumb, I would say it would be half the size of your thumb that was streaking across the sky and doing some very weird maneuvers in the sky. Now, I don't know what it was.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that things I was mentioning were connected, but I just remembered that you had your first kind of, it was odd. But, no, this lack of strength, this lack of mental strength, or it just feels like things are getting harder to do, mentally, physically. The time is shorter, the stress is higher, and these other feelings seem to be higher, these feelings of sadness or depression or something being off, something not right. These seem to be being shared by a lot of people.
Well, folks, I believe, too, and Rick Wiles and I were talking about this off air, I think that we are engaged personally, and he does too. I think that we're engaged in a war, in a battle here on Earth that has a corresponding battle in heaven, and I believe that we are engaged in fighting not only a despotic, tyrannical government, but fighting the demonic that's behind it. Fighting the demonic that is pushing it, fueling it.
Right. And when I don't know, when I get in these weird, funky moods, the last thing I feel like doing is reading the Bible or doing something for somebody else. I feel lazy. I feel lethargic. My head, I just kind of sit there and stare off for a couple minutes. Thinking about doing something just makes you tired. But I was thinking today about this. These are the times that we need to do what we don't feel like doing, because we're going to have a time, not in the near future here, that's going to be like that. There's going to be lots of things that we're not going to want to do, lots of things that we're going to have to do, and probably won't feel like we do have the strength to do it. And one way to condition yourself, to condition your mind and your brain, and to change your behaviors is to start really doing things when you feel least like doing them. I know it sounds horrible. It sounds horrible just thinking about it. But if we get through rough times, I mean, we're going to have to really buckle down and get tougher with ourselves, with our thinking, with our disciplines, making sure that we are not slipping in any aspect of our spiritual life, especially.
Well, look, we are engaged in a spiritual war, and it's interesting. Mitch, our producer, had said this, and God love him. I mean, it is a spiritual war, and in addition to that, folks, you've got cell phone towers, you've got the Wi-Fi, you've got smart meters. Think about everything that's going on around you that you can't see, and how can and realistically, how could they not affect your brain waves? And of course, you're stressed anyway, because if you listen to this program, if you listen to the news, things aren't right. You've got this feeling of dread and stress, and which, by the way, our next guest, hopefully we can help you overcome some of the practical aspects of this. But a lot of this is spiritual, which is why we do the Sunday programs, or which is why we are doing the Sunday programs, because we need that spiritual enrichment, and I believe we're one of the few programs that ties together the spiritual battle with the physical battle, and I'm so thankful to be able to do that. I'm thankful to our guests. It's an amazing thing, because we do see people out there who are stressed to the max, kind of like rubber bands stretched out, ready to break. Mitch, our producer, said he calls them hell on earth days, because with all the things going on, you're also eating processed foods. A lot of us are we have to, or we choose to, or whatever, because of the situation. What are you going to do? But there are other ways to cope with things. Go for a walk. Take your dog out for a walk. Get away from the TV. Get away from the noise. Get away from things for a while. Think about your mental health, because we are going to have to be in tune spiritually, in tune physically, in tune mentally when things begin to break down. And you've got the Bible, you've got prayer, you've got family, or even if you don't have family, you've got us. If we can be part of your lives collectively, we'd love to be. You're not alone. Folks, understand that you are not alone in this. And this reminds me just very quickly because I know we're about ready to close out here for the first hour, but I had done a YouTube video yesterday concerning the incident that happened to me, and you talk about stress. I got to tell you, the stress level in the Hagmann household has been off the charts. I mean, you can't even measure it with a...
No, it's not my fault.
Well, no, it's partly his fault.
Yeah. Well, not when I say not my fault, like it used to be. It used to be my fault.
And let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, if you have teenagers at home, I am praying doubly for you. I will pray double for you if you got teenagers at home. And in fact, I think the parents of teenagers should really, I don't know, there should be some club that could be formed, because y'all need help. You do. Y'all need help. You've got teenagers at home. You need mental assistance. Mental assistance, maybe. I don't know. But the stress here at our household has been off the charts, and it's because of a lot of personal issues and, of course, business issues. And but we can. So, remember Bill Clinton saying, "I feel your pain." Well, look, we feel your pain too, and so just understand that. I was talking with my wife earlier today, and she had to make some very, 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 very difficult decisions of late, all for her family situation. And she looked at me and she said, "Did I make all of the proper decisions this involving her father and some things, because it really put a strain on their relationship. I mean, of course, he's suffering from a form of Alzheimer's, or Alzheimer's, I'm not sure, and you know the story, but regular listeners do anyway. And things are better now, but there were time there where decisions had to be made that my father-in-law kind of, he just seemed to resent, couldn't comprehend, but they were in his best interest. Little things. I mean, even the smallest of things. For example, changing a lock would just upset him terribly. And individuals, ladies and gentlemen, listeners with family members with Alzheimer's, sometimes the slightest little thing changes or affects a person dramatically. So please keep her in your prayers, my wife, because she's done everything right and kept them going. Boy, if you just can see fit with maybe popping her an email of encouragement, and I don't ask. I mean, it would be great. She'd love to hear from you. I'm sure. Of course, she's probably going to hit me on the head with a frying pan for even me talking about this. But her email address is rhagman@roadrunner.com. That's rhagman@roadrunner.com. I just want to say, hey, I'm thinking about you, because we're all a big family. We're all a extended family, and we're late for a break. Folks,
yes, we are.
Go ahead, take us out, Joe.
You're listening to the Hagmann and Hagmann Report this Wednesday, June 19th, 2013, just 2 days away from the first day of summer on the calendar year. We're coming back with a very special guest, author of Emergency Air, F.J. Bonham, and we're going to be talking about practical survival methods with a budget. We'll be right back.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to hour number 2 of this live broadcast, the 19th day of June 2013. I'm Doug Hagmann, co-host with Joe Hagmann. Together we are the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. I'd like to welcome the new stations joining us for this hour. And you missed a good first hour, by the way. We were talking about the news of the day, and I ended on a note about my wife, and I just want to say that please keep her in your prayers. You know, I've never seen in all of our years of marriage, never seen the stress get to under so much stress, and just please keep her in her prayers. If an email of encouragement, just as a favor to me, or Hagmann@roadrunner.com. Don't tell her I said that, though. Don't tell her I said that, because she'll hit me over there with a frying pan. I'm telling you. So tomorrow I'll be talking with even worse I'm talking today. Now, having said that, I got to tell you, I got a book in the mail, or both Joe and I got books in the mail called Emergency Air for Shelter-in-Place Preppers and Home-Built Bunkers. And I looked at that. I picked it up, started reading it, and I thought, well, man, a lot of information here to grasp, but good information, things I have not seen elsewhere, even in the most comprehensive books. And I noticed the name of the author as F.J. Bohan. That's Frank Bohan. And I thought, I'd like to talk with him at some point, because I had made a couple of mistakes about air inside homes and heating and stuff, and oh boy, and when you make a mistake with that, you really make a mistake. But our guest for the rest of the show, perhaps, and we can talk him into staying, I know he's a busy guy. He's the author of 3 books. His name is Frank J. Bohan, F.J. Bohan. He is the author of 3 books: Living on the Edge, A Family's Journey to Self-Sufficiency, Barbed Wire Barricades and Bunkers, The Free Citizen's Guide to Fortifying the Home Retreat, and his latest work out right now, Emergency Air for Shelter-in-Place Preppers and Home-Built Bunkers. Now, I'll tell you what, he's got over 30 years experience as a survivalist and homesteader. Now, we're not talking about the A&E survivalist type people. We're talking about practical, real people. He's happy to share the lessons that he's learned from casual observations and just living on the planet, just doing the things we need to do, just to help you, the listener, he believes that being a prepper is a primary character trait of all survivalists and homesteaders, and that helping others to prepare can only make our country and community stronger when a crisis occurs. And I concur with that. You know, in looking at his 3 books, his books address how the average low to middle income prepper, folks, that's you and I, right? That's us. How we can enjoy the same level of security and preparedness as the elite and wealthy, and we can do it for much less. He stresses that clean air, fresh water, and a library of hard copy books are the keys to any prepper's survival in the times ahead. And I got to tell you, folks, his latest book, Emergency Air, it's got to be in your library. It should be in every home and office in the country. There is not a survival or prepper book available that's not complete without adding this book to it. I've been told that Mr. Bohan enjoys fishing and hunting and, my favorite, drinking coffee. And with that, I'd like to welcome our guest, Mr. Bohan. Welcome to the Hagmann Report.
Doug, thank you very much. That's quite an introduction. Joe, hello.
Well, you deserve it. You've got some great material out there.
Well, you've pretty much said it all. I hope I can add more to that tonight.
Well, you know what you can, and I'll tell you what you can, is we have a big family. That's the way I look at it. A big family of listeners, and I feel close to every one of them. Even those I don't know. I care about what happened to all of us. We are Christians. We're looking for answers. We're looking for the truth. We're looking for the best ways to go about things. Before we get into the preparation stuff, because we need to do that. You need to help us do that. We have to hold our hands through this. But before we get into that, Frank, let me ask you, where are we at in this country right now in terms of needing to be thinking about preparing? Where do you see us at?
There's very little time left, Doug. I've been stressing to everyone I know, and I've written about it in all 3 of these books, that we all have to be prepared for difficult times that are come fast, and unfortunately they're just getting quicker every day. This last work of mine, the Emergency Air, was actually inspired because I needed to get a message out that people could be better prepared than they are, and there's always time to find something to improve your survivability in what's coming.
Well, okay. Yeah, we know time is short. We don't know what it is. We suspect we narrowed down a few its, meaning what the crisis might be. But we saw here in the last couple of weeks the severe weather in Oklahoma. But there's and of course last year with Sandy that went up the coast, and it was interesting because I lived 600 miles away from where Sandy hit, I think, or 500. I don't know. A long way away, but I could walk into Walmart that day or two before that storm hit and not find a jug of water on the shelf. You couldn't find a generator anywhere. You couldn't find anything, and that just tells me that people are so ill prepared for anything. So, and with you saying time is short,
absolutely, and the society we've created here in the United States is basically one of enslavement. If you're dependent on anybody or any outside force to exist in this world, you're in essence a slave to that society. Being prepared and self-sufficient is freedom in and of itself, and that's pretty much what the message I've stressed to my own family, to my kids, and anyone who'll give me their ear, I'll pretty much tell them that message.
Are you fearful? Sorry, Joe, I talked over. Are you fearful of what you see happening within our own government right now, the militarization of our government? Does that bother you at all?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I have some first within my family, my oldest son actually attended West Point, and I remember when I dropped him off, I had a chance to really review some of the tenets of West Point and what they stood for. And one of the things that really struck me was that at the academy, what they call tolerance was something you were guilty of. And today's society teaches that tolerance is what we're supposed to live by. It's just it's striking how we've done 180 degrees in the opposite direction of what this country was founded on.
Exactly, and yeah, the tolerance of evil becomes that's when tolerance itself becomes evil, and that's what we're seeing today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to jump into your first point you made. You said if we are dependent on any outside force, we are basically a slave to that outside force, whatever it may be. I see the country, and I see corner stores. I see all the people on welfare, the people on lines for the Obama funds, even regular people who live out, have their own farms. They're needing to go buy seed and other things for their animals. How many? I mean, if you could even give a percentage, 1%, 0.5%, how much of America is actually self-sufficient, self-sustainable?
I don't. That's an excellent question. My guess is that it's a very small amount, 0.1%, if that. You would have to be independently wealthy to just pay your taxes if you were running a farm or a homestead that was self-sufficient for you and your family, because usually it's not one person involved. It's a group and a family unit. But the government's done an excellent job of destroying the family unit, indoctrinating children in the public schools. In fact, I was in shock. I just learned last week that they're starting to bring 3-year-olds. I thought 5-year-olds were starting kindergarten. At least that was my recollection. But now they're starting to bring 3-year-olds in to the public school system. Just get them out of the family unit as quick as possible and start teaching them whatever the government indoctrination program happens to be.
It's really frightening how we see things progress, and we're talking off air. Things are just moving so quickly right now that we barely have a chance to keep up. It's incredible. I never saw a time like this in my life, and of course I'm only 35, so no, not that's anyway. But what I'd like to do is use tonight to kind of pick your brain a little bit and start kind of from scratch. I know that we have probably one of the most advanced audiences in the world, okay? The people who listen to this program, they know what's going on. But we also have some people, too, that are just getting started. And everybody's got to start somewhere. Now, with people like Steve Quayle we have on and the guerrilla economist, we talk about the potential for economic collapse, and we talk about a lot of things. And about the importance of silver and gold, and not everyone can afford silver and gold. Heck, I mean, really, it's difficult enough to clip out the coupons. You get calluses on your fingers when you clip out the coupons on papers. When you go to the grocery store to buy the extra can of food for your pantry to be prepared for what's coming. So we understand. So, but guide us through. Let's, if you can, or I know you can, if you will. Let's start from the beginning with our audience here. What do we need to do to prepare for what is coming? What are the first steps in your mind?
From a practical standpoint, you've got to have a safe location. And that's going to be a different place for everybody. Some people might have the means to move to the country. Some people won't have that opportunity, and where they are right now is where they're going to stay. But they've got to make it a safe location. And in making it safe, I feel they've got to first off have some level of personal protection. It's their choice whether that's a rifle or a handgun. I also believe they need to stock food and have a source of fresh water. And again, it's something that it takes time. Being prepared is never an inexpensive thing, but if you realize the importance, you'll start eating out less perhaps and putting that savings towards your future, because that's what this is about, is preparing for your future, a certain future.
You know what, Frank, you're exactly right. But let's stick with the first point about where you're located, and this is something too that we're beginning to see. And I'm not sure if you address this in your books. I'm very interested, by the way, in your book, Barbed Wire, Barricades, and Bunkers. That book. Telling you how to fortify your home. But what we're noticing, and maybe this is a little bit off track, but what we've been noticing is the husband might be plugged into things and the wife might be a little bit, come on, you're overreacting, or vice versa. Have you seen any of that, and do you have any practical advice on how to handle things like that? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know exactly what you're saying. And I'll tell you straight out, I was blessed with a wife who gets it and understands. She's seen what's been developing over the years, and she's responded to it in the same manner that I wanted to respond to it. So that we're a good team in our own household. But I do know people that sometimes it's the husband, sometimes it's the wife who sees trouble on the horizon and wants to move towards preparedness, yet there's constraints because there's not a uniform stand in the family, and that's a very difficult situation. I believe that the only when you apply logic, it's not like you're buying beans and rice and it'll go to waste. You can always eat the food. Paying off your mortgage is always a positive thing. Saving your money and converting it into gold or silver is again always going to be a positive thing. But it is difficult. If there was less distractions in our lives, we would certainly have maybe better communication with our families and maybe see things more clearly.
Well, that's very true. Very true. And also, those things that you were talking about, you don't necessarily have to, although you don't have to be secretive about it, you don't have to telegraph what you're doing. Of course, a wife, if the husband's not on board, can certainly stock up on provisions, and the husband can make some, if he takes care of the checkbook and pay off some bills and prepare, maybe even buy a little bit of ammunition, guns, whatever. But I mean, so we know that there are things there, but we're just seeing a lot of divisiveness here within families. I've never seen that. I've never seen this before, and I think it's a spiritual thing. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
I agree with you. I've seen more of it, but everybody has to start their journey at some point. And for me and my wife, we started many years ago. In reality, we had both of us had jobs. My kids were in public schools, and one evening, and I mentioned this in my book, Living on the Edge. One of my sons comes home, and I'm a news junkie, so I was watching one of the broadcast news, and there was a story about a kid who robbed a 7-Eleven at gunpoint. And I've got a fifth grader. My son is laughing. He's rolling on the floor laughing about this kid who robbed a 7-Eleven. And, I was a little upset with him, and I asked him, what he found so funny about this. And he looks at me and he says, Dad, they can't touch him. He's a minor. And I was in shock that my 5th grade son's telling me this. And I asked him, I said, who's filling your head with this information? And he goes on to tell me how he's got a school counselor and how he's been pulled out of class, and he's had these private one-on-one sessions with the school counselor. And the counselor told him that, you know, son, you could rob a bank and nobody could touch you because you're a minor. And you can imagine, as a parent, how shocked you'd be to hear this type of information coming from your kid. The very next morning, you know, I was on the phone to the school superintendent the next morning, and I was pretty much given the routine. Well, why don't you want us to talk to your kid? What did you have to hide?
That's scary.
Yeah, and when it took that turn, the conversation, I knew there was no point in continuing. But when my wife and I sat down and discussed it, she agreed to quit her job and homeschool the kids. And it was probably one of the best decisions that we made as a family we could have made. The schools were poisoning our children, and not poisoning them against us, but poisoning them against a society that we had thought existed. And for us, once that decision was made, typically the largest tax anybody pays is going to be your real estate tax that goes to the local school. And, and that being the case, you know, if you figure out that you're not using the benefit of the tax you're paying, it's a very easy choice to then say, hey, let's just go find someplace less expensive to live. And that's what we did. We moved out of the high tax area, and we decided to live off grid. We bought 60 acres, 60-acre ranch out in the middle of the high desert of Arizona, and we spent about 15 years out there living off grid, homeschooling the kids. And that's pretty much what's detailed in that first that I had published is living on the edge.
Okay, all right. Well, I know before the program you and I spoke, and I had kind of casually asked you what you thought your most important book was or is, and you responded by saying Emergency Air, the latest book, by the way, and you had pointed some things out to me in that book that I have a tendency now to agree. Of course, folks, we can talk about food and water all day long. You cut us off of air, we got some problems. And he had talked about the DHS warnings, you know, shelter in place with the Spain and the duct tape and so on. But that's something we'll get to in a moment here. And folks, by the way, I agree. All three books are important. The latest book, Emergency Air, is definitely important because it's got some really interesting practical solutions to some complex problems. But before we get into that, let's just say we have most of our audiences is located in wherever they're located at, wherever they might be living at, whatever their conditions are. Where do they start? Where would you start if you were just getting into the preparation mode here? Aside from, well, I mean, where would you begin? Buy books, but what do we need to do?
Took EMT training years ago, and the first thing we were taught were the what we call the ABCs, and it's airway, breathing, and circulation. And you just followed that logic through, then you'd end up with nation and nourishment and shelter. And so the point being is that breathing is number one. So you have to be sure that you're in an area that is safe from any poisons that you're going to be breathing. You would certainly we know there's a rule of threes, or sometimes it's called the rule of fours. You can last 4 days without water, but you're only going to last 4 minutes without air. So I always put air as number one.
And this is something, folks, that we don't talk much about. We talk about the food and the water and such. But we don't talk about air. Let's talk about air. What? I'm going to give you the floor here. Let's just assume that we're talking to people in single-family homes for a moment, or wherever you might. What do we need to? What do we need to know, and what do we need to do?
Well, to kind of bring everybody to the same page, it was striking right after the events of 9/11. We, as a nation, were then the attention was given towards threats. Anthrax was a scare. They started discussing dirty bombs and a dispersal of radioactive particles in a local area. And then here recently we've seen threats from North Korea. Perhaps they would launch a nuclear strike against the United States. And all of these things are to create hazardous air situations. That's when the CDC and Homeland Security started throwing out the suggestion that you could use duct tape, plastic sheeting to seal yourself in your house or a room of your house. And they commonly refer that to sheltering in place. And this was to protect yourself from any outside threat, an airborne particle that might be hazardous to your health or deadly. And at that time, you probably couldn't find a roll of duct tape at a hardware store or the lumber yard because everybody ran out and bought plastic sheeting and duct tape. And thankfully, since that time, we've never had a national situation that called for anyone to actually seal themselves up in the house. Because what happens is as soon as you seal yourself in, you're limiting your supply of breathable air.
And you know what? I got to tell you, Frank, that should be common sense. But I never really gave a thought. I know how ignorant I must sound to people, but I just never gave that a thought. You know, you seal up the house, but yeah, it's. I guess the sheeting should come with warnings with the plastic bags. This is not a toilet, put it over your head or whatever. But but seriously, I never gave it a thought. And by the way, too, a lot of people, even it doesn't have to be a terrorist attack or anything like that. A lot of people live near nuclear power plants and die from them. And for crying out loud, something can go wrong. So, you know, there are a lot of different angles we can approach this from. So, air is an important one. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt. What do we do?
Oh, you're absolutely right, and it's not that people don't realize you have to be able to breathe. It's just a misunderstanding or lack of enough to know how long you actually have to breathe. When you start cutting off your supply of breathable air, most people just don't stop to think, well, how do I calculate? That's not something they teach you in school, how to calculate the breathable air. So all these things were bothering me, and I had written the book, Barbed Wire, Barricades, and Bunkers, and this subject has always been ignored by virtually every prepper and every bunker book that's been written. And I felt actually compelled to find a solution. And it was actually with the help of my wife. I think she's the one who wanted me to vacuum the house, and I finally realized what you need is something to filter the particles out of the air. And from that moment, I devised a method that anyone could take, a shop vac type vacuum cleaner, along with a HEPA filter, and making a few very simple modifications, use that and an air pump that actually filters hazardous particles out of your breathing air and brings that air into your shelter. So it makes using the duct tape and the plastic sheathing sense, because now you can filter the air and be safe inside your home or your office when you're under these types of threats. And it's very simple. I didn't really invent anything here. I just did a lot of research, and what I learned was that the HEPA filter was originally developed by the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission back in the 1940s during the Manhattan Project. And most people, I think, remember the Manhattan Project was the development of nuclear weapons. Those workers needed to be protected from radioactive dust in the workplace. That's why they developed the filter. Now, the original design and patent is owned by the government, and they lease it out. But the HEPA filter, by definition, has to filter. If it has that name on it, HEPA, it must filter 99.97% of all particles 0.3 microns in size or larger. Now, what that means to you and I is we're protected from cat dander and pollens, and that's why you see a lot of HEPA filters being sold at department stores, because that's how it was commercially marketed. But what they fail to tell us is that the HEPA filter will filter out anthrax, bacterial warfare dispersions, radioactive fallout dust, virtually any particle, solid particle in the air will be captured by that HEPA filter.
And that's a very interesting. It's interesting. By the way, it's interesting that they omit that. They throw everything else on there. Why not throw that stuff on? But I have to tell, and ladies and gentlemen, I've got to tell you this. I do have a shop vac. It comes in handy for a lot of uses. And I went to my local hardware store. I like to buy as opposed to Lowe's and stores. And I needed a filter. And frankly, I didn't even know that they took these filters until I was looking and to figure out why my shop vac wasn't working properly. Not getting all kinds of, it was spewing things back at me, and really messed my hair too at the same time. But anyway, I went to the store, and on the shelf was a HEPA filter for a shop vac. I never saw it before. I never knew they existed. And they were on sale. It was clearance, so I bought it. It wasn't very much money at all. In fact, it was just a few bucks more than the regular sponge filter for the shop vacs. And then, in our conversation today with author Frank Bohan, who we're talking to, on page 28 of his new book, Emergency Air, lo and behold, here is this shop vac, a picture of a shop vac, and with a HEPA filter. In a shop vac, folks, you can create an environment where you can survive inside your home should you need to shelter in place. It's that simple, and it doesn't have to be Rothschild or Rockefeller or Kissinger or whatever to do it. So, wow! I mean, simple things like this, practical advice like this could save our lives, huh?
It could, and I was so excited when I realized the big picture, and I really wanted to get this information out to the public. I took it immediately to some FEMA and CERT. CERT is the FEMA program to get community involvement. I think CERT stands for Community Emergency Action Teams. But I did take this system before the book was published, and I showed it to a couple of the top people in the state and county levels, and they just looked at it and said, "Wow, this is going to save lives. If you use this system to filter the air when there's a radioactive fallout threat, an anthrax threat." There's countless other. It could be, in fact, a pandemic virus. Viruses are stopped by the HEPA filter. So if the CDC announced that there was a pandemic threat of the new bird flu, and you felt like you lived in an area that people were coming down with the left and right, you could seal up a room in your house and use this system to be filtering the air so that that contaminated air doesn't enter the house.
Wow. That's pretty doggone interesting. All right, so we've got a situation here where any airborne contaminants up to and including 3 microns in size, or 3 microns in size and over, could be, or 0.3.
Yes, sir, 0.3.
Okay, all right, could be filtered out, and you're talking about some very nasty stuff. So, all right, this is obviously one example, folks, of what this author talks about, ways, inexpensive ways. Shop vacs, $30-40, HEPA filter, I don't know, half that much, if that, and of course, the sheeting and the duct tape. But some very practical advice for survival, for the air, especially if you're going to be sheltering in place. Now, what else do we need to know? I mean, that by itself is worth the price of the book, which, by the way, you can find on Amazon.com. We'll put a link up off of our website, HomelandSecurityUS.com, Frank, for your books, for people to get a hold of your books. But what else do we need to know here? What else would it be good to know?
Well, the other, what goes hand in hand with being able to filter the outside air is knowing when to filter the outside air. Now, the people who manufacture these vacuum cleaners, they may or may not endorse the use in this manner. They're actually being used under zero load, so they're not being stressed out in any manner, and typically the filter's not going to be clogged excessively unless you live just outside of a blast zone of some sort and a catastrophic event occurs. So these vacuum cleaners in this use, they shouldn't get any trouble, but you don't want to be running them continuously 24 hours a day. So what you really need to know is, well, how often do I have to run a vacuum cleaner in this manner? And that just comes down to a little bit of geometry, probably 5th grade level. Yeah, I had to brush up on it when I wrote the book again, but we're just calculating the volume of air in the room that you've sealed off, and that's just the length times the width times the height, give you a cubic foot volume, and then you have to subtract what's in the room because that's displacing breathable air. And the way I explain it is, just imagine everything piled in the center of the room. How big is that pile? And do the same calculation, width times length times height, and subtract it from your overall size of the room, and that'll give you cubic feet of breathable air. Now, we have to just speak in generalities because my breathing might be a little bit faster than someone else's, and I might use oxygen at a quicker rate. But on average, people breathe about 400 cubic feet of air in a day's time. That's one person. So knowing that, you can then divide your room and figure out roughly how much air is in there. But the variable comes in is that as you exhale, carbon dioxide starts building up in the room. And probably the best illustration I could offer would be if you've ever sat in a movie theater down in the front row, and you know how the floor of a movie theater is sloped down towards the screen so that everybody can see that's behind you. Well, that's where all the carbon dioxide collects. Carbon dioxide at a molecular level is actually heavier than oxygen or nitrogen, and therefore it's going to settle towards the bottom of a room. So, what happens after the first half of the movie? The ushers are over on the side doors and, distracting people by opening that door to try to vent out that collection of carbon dioxide, because the room is getting heavy and people are getting sleepy and a little lethargic through the second half of the movie. That's what happens in your sealed shelter. So,
wow, it makes me claustrophobic, and I'm not subject to claustrophobia, but it makes me claustrophobic just to think about what you just described, by the way. So, sorry. How do you choose a room? And this is something that I was thinking about. If something happened near me, how would I choose a room? I mean, how do you do that?
Well, it really depends on the threat. And what the HEPA filter will do is filter solid particles. So what it will not do is something we should mention, is it will not filter chemicals or gases. So if the threat happened to be a manufactured agent, a warfare agent, those are made to settle in the ground level and perhaps 15 to 20 feet off the ground. And they will dissipate in time. They'll settle and be absorbed by the dirt or the earth. But anybody caught in that level, needs to be out of it. So, if it's that type of event, the highest ground you can find is going to be the safest ground. So you might want to. So
you're thinking, like, if it's a story home, the second floor room up there would be better than the basement, we'll say.
Exactly, and okay. I would probably choose maybe a master bedroom because there's a bathroom adjoining it.
Right, I was just going to say that. Believe me, you need that. Okay, all right. What about east? What about direction? The east, west, north, south? Is that important?
Well, if you are knowledgeable about the prevailing winds, you would probably want to be on the facing side, simply because there's a backdraft created on the opposite side. Most people probably aren't situationally aware of which way the wind's blowing, and it may be more important to be located in the kitchen or the basement rather than be concerned about the wind. So I really hadn't focused a whole lot on wind direction, unless if you have no basement and it's a rambler type house, you're better off where there is the fewest number of windows.
Okay. Well, that makes sense to me. And access to a bathroom, believe me, guys, if you're married, that's important. Your wife, it's important, and especially with children too. But
I got a question from one of the listeners. The HEPA filters, these can only be purchased through vacuum cleaner bags that we furnace. Do they come in furnace filters also? The point I was getting to that somebody was asking was, are there a way to make masks, or are they available, the HEPA mask, face mask?
Well, hey, Joe. How you doing? I hadn't heard
Good
from
evening.
you. Joe, the answer is they do make HEPA filters for home furnaces. And, in fact, one of FEMA's booklets that they publish suggests that you upgrade to a HEPA filter. And they also suggest one of these floor-standing air cleaners that have HEPA filters. However, I don't recommend either one of those, because if the house furnace is what you're depending on, that means that the threat is already there in the house with you. And what's the point? You've already been exposed to the radioactive dust or the anthrax. Those home filters only filter the air that's already in the house.
That makes sense. And it's little, you know what, folks? It's little things like these that could very well trip us up. And Frank, in reading your books, or looking at specifically your latest book, it looks to me like even our listeners who are somewhat impaired or physically infirmed can accomplish whatever they need to do if they're alone without help. Looking at the instructional aspects of your book, it doesn't take a muscle man or somebody with a degree in engineering to accomplish some of the very simple things that you lay out in your book, Emergency Air. And that makes me feel good because I know a lot of our listeners are not physically up to par. So, I mean, that's a true statement, isn't it? Just reassure me there or tell me otherwise.
No, absolutely. My goal in putting these systems together was to be as clear and as simple as possible. Anyone should be able to run down to their big box lumber yard and reasonably spend $100 or less and be able to put together these air pumps and systems that we're talking about to protect their houses and their families.
Okay. All right. Now, I got to jump. I got to go kind of take a left turn here and ask you a question. I had a security assessment done in my home one time. It was a gentleman, a friend of mine who was deeply involved in security, and for a class, long story, for a class he was taking, he had to kind of he had to do a homework assignment, do a couple of security assessments. So he really took the assignment seriously. All right. And the next thing I know, he's telling me, well, I need to have I don't know, I think 6 or 7 pallets of bags of sand, for my lower level windows. And I'm thinking, well, holy cow. Do we need to go that far in sheltering in place? How far do we really need to go reasonably? And I know that's kind of an open-ended, weird, odd question, but seriously, practically speaking, how far should we?
Everybody has a different idea about what type of threat is coming their way, and my advice has always been to prepare for whatever level of threat you expect. And truly, we all can't be prepared for every contingency. There's so many technical threats out there, and so many enemies, so to speak. Maybe I shouldn't use the word enemies, but let's say just people threatening us. We don't know where the threats are necessarily going to come from. Everything you and I are talking about tonight has to do with breathable air. There are other aspects of these threats that people need to be concerned about. For instance, if a nuclear weapon went off on the continental United States somewhere west of us, we all may experience nuclear fallout. So this system would certainly filter the air so that you and your children are not breathing in those radioactive particles, which would cause very serious health problems and sometimes death. Something like the cesium-137, just one particle of that, I understand, can kill you. So those types of things you can protect against with this system. But that's not going to protect you from actual radiation that might exist. So
two different things, right?
Okay. Exactly. Yeah. So the radiation, this is something that we saw through the 50s and 60s with the Department of Defense, their plans for homemade shelters. You need to put as much space, earth, between you and that threat. So if you have a basement, that's where I'd recommend you be. You have a basement. If you have a basement window, that's the window you should set this system up for the air filtration. But at the same time, you should probably have some mass of earth protecting that window, so that any radiation that might come from that side of the house couldn't penetrate, into where you and the kids are.
Okay, now let me just back up here, because the second floor, initially we were talking about the second floor being a kind of a good place, but I suppose, are you saying when we're talking about radiation or radioactivity, the basement or a subterranean type of level would be the better choice? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. If radiation is what is coming your way, you need as much mass between you and the threat of the radiation. So,
all right.
It's typically 3 feet of earth is going to shield you fully from radiation.
Okay.
18 inches. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, 3 feet. When you say 3 feet, I'm thinking 3 feet on top of us, or 3 feet outward from the basement wall.
Up and out.
Up and out. Okay.
Yeah. So, and this is where, if someone was going to design their own buried shelter, and I do detail how to do those types of things in the barbed wire barricades and bunkers, you do need to have 3 feet of earth over top of you. And that's, again, you're creating a situation where it's an enclosed space. There's going to be oxygen issues, and that's why I came out with emergency air, to address that issue.
When we're using these air filter systems in you're outside of a nuclear blast radius, and maybe 2 examples, and then we'll say a bird flu pandemic is the second. In the nuclear blast, how long would we need to have our air filtered in a way where we are keeping ourselves secluded from that outside air without having it purified or filtered first?
Joe, that there's too many variables there, but if it rains enough between you and where the event occurred, that could wash all of the radioactive particles out of the air, and it could be a safe situation. But that's not to say it's safe from radiation, because now all that radioactive dust is on the ground somewhere and washing into crops or gardens or even into the water supply. The technical threats that nuclear weapons present to everybody are very severe. It's a very difficult situation to be put in to protect yourself in the event something like that happens.
Wow. So we could, a lot of variables, rain, and that's something I never really thought of either, but it does make sense because you've got dust, and of course the rain would control that. But then, as you said, you got contamination of the water supply. People with water wells, and I know people that have wells that are 75, 50, or 50 feet deep, we'll say.
Yeah.
Or 75 feet deep. Is this I'm just asking this because I'm curious. Would the radiation, would that affect water at that depth, at 75 feet, we'll say, or do you know, or I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, I don't have the specific answer for you, Doug, but I do know that the groundwater can be contaminated with radiation depending upon where it enters into the system.
Okay, because then we're talking about a whole different thing, and that's the filtering of the water. But your key here is the air. What other? I mean, boy, I'm just trying to get through my head.
The power source.
Living in this, you know.
Yeah, the power source for running these filters.
Well,
you need generators, batteries.
Yeah. Generators would probably be the way to go, right?
That's generators would be my first choice. my wife and I have solar panels and battery banks that we can then use inverters to switch the 12 volt over to a modified sine wave for the 110. However, there's a real chance that the EMP effect might wipe out everybody's power. And now you're faced with, what do I do to filter or provide filtered air to an environment where there is no electricity at all? And in the book, I detail how to build a hand pump that will do the same thing, and give ideas on how you can actually make a large air pump that is operated by hand. But these are just emergency stopgap measures. The energy used to operate a hand pump, ultimately you're not going to be able to keep up with it. You're going to be breathing heavier. You're going to be using up more of the oxygen in that confined space, and ultimately you're not going to be able to keep up with bringing enough fresh air into your location.
Wow, a lot to think about, but you do cover a lot of this, most of this, in fact all of this that we've talked about in your book, excuse me, Emergency Air for Shelter-in-Place Preppers and Home-Built Bunkers. Folks, we're talking to author Frank J. Bohan, that's F.J. Bohan, B-O-H-A-N, author of Emergency Air and 2 other books. You can look him up at Amazon.com. We'll have a link off of HomelandSecurityUS.com directly to his book page. I would recommend buying his books, because I'll tell you something. Once again, and I'm a big proponent of Holly Deo's book, Dare to Prepare, and as well as some other preparation books, but he goes at this a little bit different and from a budgetary point of view, and we're glad to have him. Folks, you're listening to the Hagmann Report. We're going to be back right after this with hour number 3. And your questions. Frank, you have to take some questions.
Absolutely. Bring them on.
All right. Folks, stand by. Our call-in number is 661-244-9839. You know the drill. We'll be right back.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to our third and final hour of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report this Wednesday, June 19th, 2013. I am seeing in the chat room that there is audio problems going on with BTR. If you want to hang in there, BTR, you can also go to thehagmanandhagmanreport.com, spell it all out, thehagmanandhagmanreport.com, and there you can get a audio stream that is uninterrupted. We are being joined by our very special guest for the second hour, author Frank Bohan of Emergency Air for Shelters-in-Place Preppers and Home-Built Bunkers. This is one of several books he has written, and we are going to start off this hour by taking questions. We have a friend of the show on hold, somebody who is very familiar with what you were speaking of, Mr. Bohan.
Is it Rocco?
It's Rocco.
Oh, this is trouble. Okay.
Trouble.
And Rocco, you are live on the air. What's on your mind today?
Hello, gentlemen. How are you this evening?
Well, let me check. I'm all right. How about you?
Hi, Doug. Hi, Joe. As usual, your show is fantastic. Love you guys. Mr. Bohan, hi. My name's Rocco. I'm from the Buffalo area.
Yes,
it's been a pleasure listening to you. I find some great insight in some of the remedies you offer for preparedness. I wanted to just give you a little background. In my case, I'm what's called a test and balance technician and indoor air quality technician. I don't know if you're familiar with testing and balancing.
Yes, sir.
I agree wholeheartedly with many of your comments and observations. I'd like to just offer a couple thoughts on my own and get your feedback. Specifically, with regard to indoor air quality, some thoughts I have related to that is one of the biggest culprits is the mass of the structure is porous, and infiltration is a huge problem. And what people don't recognize typically, irregardless if you were to create a safe zone with plastic and HEPA filtered air, you still are vulnerable to potentially a negative pressure within the household, which could be a source of infiltration. And the key, as I would, state, would be to try to create an environment such as a positive pressure environment. And just to give you a little specific, as we were talking earlier with the HEPA, the high efficiency particulate arrestor, and the 99% efficiency, it does take down the ability of taking particulate out of the air. However, when you're dealing with the radioactive material, charcoal filters are also rather useful for capturing and arresting the potential. Again, it's depending on the type of radiation we're dealing with, the alpha, gamma rays, etc. So a thought I have for our listeners is that, and I would like your thoughts on this, is typically what I would encourage people to do, because what goes in comes out. And typically when you have, just say, a central household furnace or air conditioner, you're basically circulating the air within. And what people fail to recognize is often people have things such as a bathroom exhaust. So if you just put the math of what goes in and what goes out, and you're just recirculating, you have other sources of exfiltration which could create that negative environment, i.e. that exhaust fan in the bathroom. So what I found might be useful is that upstream of a return plenum, you might want to duct outside air with charcoal filter, and then you can go through a HEPA filter along with some type of pre-filter. The thing to be mindful of is that these type of devices, these filters, create a large pressure drop, which reduces performance. I'm sure you're aware of that. You have to be mindful, first of all, of the performance, because you need so many air changes to turn over that air. Typically, you have 5 to 7 air changes an hour, and you'd like to get it up in the 7 to 10 range if you can. That's not always practical. But would you agree that the fact that you do have just the structures itself being porous will infiltrate? So it would be imperative to try, in my opinion, to maintain some type of a positive pressure. And again, that's where the introduction of the outside air with some type of charcoal and then a pre- and HEPA filter would be a real good strategy for keeping that buffer, as I say, because regardless of whatever you're doing within the structure, if you're natural infiltration, you're going to bring in that radioactive or any hazardous material. So by creating that positive pressure by the introduction of that outside air with the proper filtration and buffering that positive pressure, I think you create a much more safe living environment, regardless if it's in the basement or the household, house-wide.
Hey, Rock, you want to repeat that question? I'm just kidding.
Basically, would you agree?
I agree.
I'm sorry, I'm rambling. I apologize.
No, not at all. Everything Rocco points out is absolutely true. You have to maintain what we call an overpressure. You're creating. I hadn't thought anybody would get this technical, but Rocco's absolutely right. Pressure flows from high to low. So if there's a high pressure outside the house, or in contrast, a low pressure inside the house, the outside air will find a way through the walls, through the windows, through the doors. Modern homes are sealed pretty tight. And I'll point out to you that cancer from radon gas is on the rise. And that's because radon gas seeps up through the earth. It comes up through the concrete in your basement or your crawl space, and then it gets trapped inside these new homes that have plastic sheeting on the exterior underneath the siding, and we have energy-efficient windows and doors to try to save on our electric bills. So we've created a house that doesn't have a positive air exchange, and we call it saving money for energy, but in the meantime, it's a very unhealthy existence. Now,
right,
older
homes, thick building. building
Exactly. So
older
homes
again, and I don't mean to interrupt, sir. I just would you be in agreement that the best approach would be to try to pressurize the home because irregardless, if a house is negative in pressure, infiltration will exist. And as you say, in our efforts to be energy conservation minded, we've taken away and basically created a ton of indoor air quality problems and issues, which, as we all know, is sick building syndrome. And that's where I had strongly recommend the upstream side of a return duct to have a outdoor air. You can go as simple as a 6-inch round piece of pipe to an outdoor, so that you're blending just a percentage of outdoor air, so that you ultimately pressurize your home. That puts that barrier in place. And then the key is that minimal amount of outdoor air that you bring in is filtered properly through the methods of either using charcoal filters, which are useful with radioactive material, and then a pre-filter and HEPA. Again, being mindful that these also all impose pressure drops and resistance, which will then derate the performance of, let's just take a central air handler. So it's important to be mindful of the capabilities of your furnace or your air-moving systems. However, I think it's very, very important that we do introduce that outdoor air with the proper filtration, because ultimately, if we keep that building envelope positively pressurized, there's not going to be that potential for infiltration. Because irregardless if you create that zone of safe barrier, there are going to be points of entry, irregardless of how tight your home is, that are just going to compromise the integrity of what the effort was put forth, which was ultimately to create a safe environment. And I was just wondering what your thoughts were with the potential of utilizing that type of arrangement with the introduction of the outdoor air.
I don't disagree with what you're saying, Rocco. It's all correct. You can put those systems in your homes, but the question then comes at what cost? And you're talking about a whole house system. What I focus on is an emergency situation where, and I'll throw two other emergencies into the mix here. What if we had a volcanic eruption like we did with Mount St. Helens? People needed to have some means to breathe. If you had asthma and you were in an area where volcanic ash was quickly filling your breathing air, or perhaps you live in the Southwest and one of these dust storms kicks up and they're just having a recurrence of this fungus that causes valley fever. You need to be able to filter these things out. Whole house systems are notoriously not uniform in their construction. You've got some builders who pay special attention to seal off ductwork. Someone may have had a bad day and forgot something, on another day. So I don't trust, in a uniform sense, the whole house furnace systems. And furthermore, the biggest problem with HEPA filters is that you can't get a seal where the filter connects to the furnace. It's typically, that's your infiltration point, is that the air just bypasses the filter altogether. So,
okay.
And as far as charcoal, I'll just point out to you that activated charcoal has a shelf life also. So if you're going to have that type of system, you're subject to having to replace that filter as well. But I do completely agree with what you say. All those things are positive things. If you have the funds and the ambition to seal up your whole house, absolutely, you have to create a positive pressure zone. You have to have a high pressure in the house at all times. What I suggest is one room or maybe two rooms, and you have to do an evaluation as to how tight your house is. And that's
exactly. You know what, Rocco? I got to tell you this, you can become our technical advisor for, and I think you should be our technical advisor for HVAC and related issues. By the way, Frank, Rocco's calling from his red phone in his missile silo that's 150 feet underground. Rocco, we're going to cut you loose. God bless you, man. I tell you what, you know your stuff, and the pressure situation indeed is something to consider.
Well, I'd just like to thank Mr. Bohan for educating your audience, and I just want to just say one last thing, Frank. It's actually not a costly item to just incorporate a small 6-inch round pipe to introduce that amount of fresh air. It's really rather meager in cost. Again, the reason I say that is because irregardless of trying to make a safe zone of 1 or 2 rooms, you are still subject to the entire building envelope, which then has the possibility of cross-contamination. So that's why I look at it from the big picture rather than isolated areas or secure rooms. On that note, I'll let you guys go. And once again, Doug, Joe, you guys have a fantastic show. And Mr. Bowen, your knowledge is just impeccable. Thank you so much for sharing that.
God bless you, Rocco.
And
Rocco, thank you.
I'll hang up now and continue to listen and enjoy the show as always. Right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for your input, Rocco.
You know,
welcome,
Frank. We could really get into all these, and not that Rocco was suggesting anything elaborate, but we can get into some pretty elaborate stuff here. But we're talking about, and I think as I was getting into your book here, Emergency Air, we're talking about doing something on not only on a budget, but in a pinch kind of way, to a degree. I mean, you go into some planning and what have you, but quickly, I guess expedient is the word.
Having the understanding. Oh, sorry, Mr.
No, go ahead, Joe.
Bone. I was just going to say, reading this book will give you the understanding for people like me who don't understand how air flows in which direction, and just learning about how high pressure will force its way into the different things, whereas low pressure doesn't, and how the air flows, how it moves in and out of your house, your rooms that you would, I guess you would have to do some preparation in learning not only about how things work, how your home works as far as how the air flows in and out, if there are leaks, which rooms are the best, and then with that advice and knowledge, you could use these systems to implement them in a quicker amount of time in a pinch.
And Frank, your book is only, the Emergency Air book's 122 pages in length. And by the way, there's no wasted space there, but it doesn't take a PhD to understand what you write. So I want to thank you for that. But you've got the floor. What else do we need to be looking at here in all practicality, given the various budgets?
Well, the book was meant to be an eye opener for people, and my thought is, or has been, after I saw the finished work, I was trying to get impressions from the people I know, and while you and I talk about owning a shop vac or a wet and dry vacuum and having a HEPA filter, I believe that once you understand what you have to do to filter the air, you're not going to be cleaning up the vacuum cleaner that you keep in the closet or the garage in order to be filtering air in an emergency. I think that a lot of people are going to realize, hey, a vacuum cleaner is $50, $60. HEPA filter might be another $35. I'll just go ahead and have this in the ready and waiting.
Right.
You're
like the MacGyver. When I was looking at this, you're like the MacGyver of air, and folks under 30 probably have no clue what I'm talking about, but I get that impression. You're like the hey, let's work with what we have.
Exactly. I'll take that as a compliment. I like that show, the MacGyver show.
Well, yeah, you give him a toss and roll of duct tape and a pocket knife and just let him go. He could save the world, but so much to think about, really. And one thing you mentioned in the intro, and this is off topic of air, and ladies and gentlemen, this is a subject near and dear to my heart. One of the items in preparation is a good library, some books. Explain what you mean about that, aside from maybe the obvious, or even include the obvious. I don't care. But why did you mention that?
Well, in today's world, I'm just every day I'm amazed at how many people no longer read books, and I mean hard copy, paper covers, and you keep them on your bookshelf at home. Everything is electronic, and
right.
I know that there's a value to that. There's a lot of convenience to it. It saves people a lot of time, but in today's world, we don't know if a technical threat such as an EMP is going to wipe out our ability to access those files. We don't know if a power outage is going to shut us down so that we can no longer charge our notebooks and our laptops and access this information. And so I'm a strong proponent of having a large library, hard copy books, and if you'd see my office, you'd see that's just wall-to-wall books and bookshelves. And so I live what I preach in that sense.
I've got the same thing. I love hard copy books. I mean, I've got my wife purchased for me a while ago one of those pan digital book readers, but it's nothing like holding the real thing in your hands. And if something gets wiped out, if everything gets wiped out, you've got the book, the real hard copy book indeed. But what else do we need to think about here? I'm just trying to cover all of the bases, or as many as we can. I know we can't, solve or anticipate everything, but what else do we need to be thinking about here?
Well, what I also detail in the book are some of the shortcomings and efficiencies of gas masks. A lot of people believe that if they have a gas mask, they're ready to face any of these threats. And one of the things that's generally talked about is that the typical filter on these gas masks, in a worst case scenario, they're only going to last about 45 minutes. And 45
minutes?
Sure. And people have this notion that the gas mask is going to filter 100% of whatever the threat happens to be in the air, and that's just not the case either. Typically, you're just going to have a significantly reduced level of whatever that agent happens to be, so you'll still be eyes watering and dry mouth and perhaps even have convulsions from whatever the agent might be while you're wearing your gas mask. And a lot of people will think this mask isn't working right, and they'll take it off and expose themselves even more. So these were the types of things that I wanted to include in the book, just to educate people as to what they're really facing, what they're dealing with.
I'm sorry, as someone who what am I saying? As someone who watched live, you remember the first days of the Gulf War, or Desert, what was it, the first Gulf War, where we were treated to the images of the reporters, and all of a sudden the firemen would come on and they'd throw their gas mask on. 45 minutes?
Yeah.
Did they know that? I mean, because wouldn't the threat last longer than 45 minutes, or no?
Well, in a worst case scenario, now most of the time they just put those gas masks on because there was the potential of a threat. So those masks are not filtering anything. However, if they were actually in a zone that particles were present, or chemical agents, or whatever that threat happened to be, those gas masks in that worst case scenario, they're typically going to just last 45 minutes. And most of these, I'll point out, Doug, these gas masks have 2 or 3 ports, so that they could screw on a replacement filter before they screw off the used filter.
Wow. Okay. So I can't even think of a reason to have a gas mask except for those occasions when you're like right there and you need something and it's temporary and. But even at that doesn't give me the warm fuzzies when you say that. I mean, my gosh. Okay. Oh, wow. And what do you do if you've got an extra filter? How do you change it without killing yourself, too?
Well, I mean, that's, again, it's a multiple ports. So you may have a filter screw onto the right side of your mask, and before you take it off, you're screwing a new filter on the left side of your mask and doing that type of change out. But I have met a few real interesting people that have new products on the market. And one I feel I should mention is this. There's an outfit that makes a product called Ready Mask. And these folks have put together a filter that it's not HEPA by definition, but it's very close. It's 99% rather than the 99.97. And it's a very simple mask that kind of glues to your face, and it would allow somebody to walk through an environment to get to the other side, wherever safety happens to be.
So they do have their place. I mean, seriously, they do have their, which is good. We just can't rely on them. Carrie from San Antonio asked this. Now, I'm not sure if this is where this fits in, but I'll ask anyway. What about depleted uranium? Is there anything that we should know about there? I mean, is that an issue? Is this something that we should address?
You know, I wish I had specific information to depleted uranium, but what I will say is that any disbursement of particles can be filtered out with the HEPA filter.
Okay.
So as long as it is a solid that is in the air, you're going to be safe filtering it with the HEPA filter. Once it turns into the radiation aspect of it, and I should point out to you, you can spend $15,000, $20,000 on a system that is specifically made for filtering air for bunkers. I imagine you can spend as much money as you want, but all of these share the same technology. Those filter systems, they have HEPA filters. And that HEPA filter is the same HEPA filter that's in the vacuum cleaner that I'm suggesting you can use. The $20,000 filters may have a charcoal system like Rocco suggested, but there's constraint and limitations as to what it will do. Those filters, again, in a worst-case scenario, if you're at ground zero of one of these attacks, you've got 45 minutes before the filter becomes either no longer effective, and you're going to have to replace it. And I should point out, when you start replacing filters in these systems, you're now suited up because you're going to become exposed to whatever the threats are. And if that air pump is there in your bunker with you, you're opening it up, exposing everybody in that room to whatever the threat was while you change out a filter.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I remember the movie, since you brought it up here, I'll ask this question. I remember the movie, the Andromeda Strain. Remember when that came out? Are you old enough? Yeah, I'm sure you are.
Yeah.
And the just the feeling. You saw the guys walking in the full body suits, very bulky and such. I mean, is this what we're going to be reduced to in a situation, perhaps of a chemical or a biological attack? We'll say. I mean, is this something that having one of those suits? I mean, should we think about investing in one of those? I mean, or for each member of the family, or
hazmat suits?
Yeah, like a hazmat type of thing. I mean, should we go to that length?
I wouldn't go that far, Doug, and I'll tell you why. Well, unless you're going somewhere, my wife likes to go places all the time, and if she insists on going out during one of these events, we'd have to have one of those suits. Your best bet under these circumstances is to stay put and let the threat dissipate to a reasonably safe level that you can then deal with and then leave the area. Interestingly enough, chemical threats they can be deadly and certainly a grave threat, but they dissipate rapidly. So sometimes a chemical threat can be dissipated just in a matter of 6 or 7 hours. A nuclear threat with radiation involved, that may dissipate from the air quickly, but it's going to remain in the environment long term. So depending upon what the type of threat has to be, you may be staying in your home or your retreat, or you may ultimately be leaving at some point.
All right. Frank, let me switch gears here.
Yeah.
Looking at your book, Barbed Wire, Barricades, and Bunkers, okay, which for some reason I'm drawn to that book. I don't know why. I noticed that, in fact, folks, if you go to Amazon.com and you can see the book, the table of contents. Of course, you can take a look inside. I'm looking at the table of contents. We've got different things: barbed wire fences, and then barbed wire entanglements, chain link, and wire mesh fences. Things that appear to me like ways to fortify where you're at. And if you're like me, you live just outside the city, a normal home, normal neighborhood, that type of thing. What would you advise the average American to do? We're not going to be putting gun turrets up on our roof, obviously, and we're not going to be throwing barbed wire fence, across the chain link fence in our front yard or backyard, or maybe we will. What's your recommendation?
You had a threat assessment done, and I urge everyone to do their own threat assessment. Figure out what you're expecting to arrive and how they're going to arrive. If it's somebody on foot, obviously, I've got several dogs, and they do their job every day, and let me know when the mailman comes by or the UPS truck shows up, or if my neighbor's out cutting his grass. My dogs let me know what's going on constantly. But if someone's going to arrive by vehicle, you have the potential that they would use the vehicle as a ram to break in entry through a fence or a gate, and now you have to be able to control that type of entry. And what I would recommend is if you have a large property, you need to control the attainable speed of vehicles approaching your house. And you can do that by having deep gravel that someone can't get good traction to attain speed. You can do that by having curves in your driveway or barricades left, a narrow roadway. And again, you have to do your own evaluation. You may not be working on an individual level. You might be in a cul-de-sac in a community, and you're going to have to team up with everybody that's your neighbor and work together to cut off access by road into that community.
And and I just saw the news where people are forming Glock blocks. Glock blocks.
Glock blocks. That's it.
Where the very instance that you mentioned, or the very circumstance you mentioned, where people are actually getting together, talking with their neighbors, because the police response is so dismal and poor that they're getting together and working amongst themselves to control their own neighborhoods, armed, and they're being very proactive. So that's a great idea, obviously. And it's taking place across the United States. But with me, I know with my home, somebody could take a vehicle and drive through my living room and out my kitchen, without too much trouble, frankly. But your book does get into really seriously practical, and I'm being nonsensical when I say things like this, but very practical things, little things that you wouldn't normally think of, that you can do without much cost at all. You don't have to get one of those what do they have at the White House? Those things that come out from the road and block the cars from.
Oh yeah, bollards. They place those everywhere now. If you look out in front of even the department stores, they've got steel posts to stop cars from coming through the front of the stores. Some of them are decorative, and I think it's I've seen a Target store that has a giant, it must be a 5-foot diameter concrete, it's just a giant concrete ball set in front of their door that you have to walk around. But that too is a deterrent from somebody driving into the property.
Where would you go for a threat assessment? I mean, who do you call? The gentleman that I was referring to was taking a class, and he had to do it as an assignment. But the average person, who would the average person call for a threat assessment for their own home?
I know that there are a lot of people offering that. I'm not sure that I endorse anyone in particular. I think most people can sit down and come up with their own threat assessment. They just need a little bit of information on what to look for. And I do spend a little bit of time in that book, The Barbed Wire Barricades and Bunkers, explaining what to look for in threat assessments. As long as your computer's working, you can go to Google Maps and you can get a pretty good aerial view of your neighborhood. You can tell where people may infiltrate your community. You can look and see, kind of get an idea, feel who your neighbors are. Once you gather all this information and then decide who it is that you're in fear of that may come to your door, you can start to put in deterrents that are going to stop or slow those people down.
Well, how confident are you? I've got to ask you this: how confident are you that you've done everything that you can do, or here's the mindset I get into, and I just heard from somebody here this week about this, where they're looking and saying, boy, I've got this to do, and it's like an ongoing process of fortifying your home and making the preparations and preparing, and it's an ongoing process. But given the short amount of time that we have, I guess I was going to ask you how confident are you that you could withstand things, at your home. But let me rephrase the question so other people can relate to it. Given the short amount of time we have, is it possible that the listener on an average budget could take some steps with the information in your books to better their defensible position and quality of life should an event occur in the next 30 days? Is that possible? 30 days, 45 days? Can we do that?
If you're starting from zero, I would highly urge you to start networking in your community to find people of like mind. and combine your forces. 30 days is not a lot of time. I don't believe that if you're starting from absolute zero, that's enough time to be 100% prepared, but you certainly can improve your situation. Knowledge is everything, and to go back to having hard copy books. If you've read a book and you find that the knowledge it offers is worthy, you're going to keep it on your shelf. A lot of times you'll read a book and think, well, that information I could find someplace else, or maybe it didn't apply to your situation, and you don't hang on to that. But I'm working on another project right now that actually is kind of a guide for beginner preppers, and it's taken my experience in equipment and preparedness and just cutting to the chase and saying this is what you should have. And I am putting that together. But I quite candidly, I pray that we have more time. I think there's a whole lot more people that need to get prepared, and I'm always worried that there won't be enough time to get there. Yeah,
it's always a concern. Joe and I talk about this every day. We wonder how much time we have, and I was talking with an intelligence gentleman, and he said, people think that one, and it could very well be one incident could take us down, and that's the way most people think. It would be like one incident, and then bam, we're down. It's that quick. But he was saying that it could very well be a process, a slow, methodical process, a number of things taking place over a period of time. And let's hope that's the case. I mean, if we are to go down, let's hope the latter is the case as opposed to go, lights out tomorrow. So that would give us more time. But in the waning moments here of the program, we're going to give you the last word here. Any words of advice, encouragement, practical suggestions, anything we haven't covered? The floor is yours, my friend.
Well, Doug, I would say that there is enough time to better your situation. You may not have everything that you absolutely need for every contingency, but you absolutely have time to improve from where you are at this very moment. I would first start with being home and making that your shelter-in-place location, providing that you can come up with some plan of defense and that you have some stored provisions. But I also think that you have to be aware that there may be an event that causes you to have to leave home. And if that's the case, I think that it's prudent to have some sort of what people call a bug-out bag with only the essentials. I mean, you've got to have clothes that are appropriate for travel. You got to have the shoes. You got to have a method of creating fire. You've got to have some mode of defense while on the road. A lot of people talk about having a vehicle. You're going to use a truck or an RV, and you're going to load it up with everything you have, and it's really not practical. If there was an event that caused societal collapse or martial law, you're not going to be able to get fuel. You're not going to be able to get past roadblocks. You're not going to be able to stay and live in whatever your vehicle is. You're going to become a pedestrian pretty quickly.
Wow.
So I
yeah. Okay. Well, you've given us a lot of information, in particular information that's very valuable with respect to, hey, the most important thing is the next breath that we take, is it not? I mean, when you cannot breathe, suddenly, the act of breathing becomes the most important thing to you, and I think that you've covered that very well. Your 3 books, Frank, what are they, and where can people get them?
I have Living on the Edge, A Family Journey to Self-Sufficiency, Barbed Wire, Barricades, and Bunkers, The Free Citizen's Guide to Fortifying the Home Retreat, And my latest book is Emergency Air for Shelter-in-Place Preppers and Home Bunkers. And they're all three available either through Paladin Press at their website, which is www.paladin-press.com, or through Amazon.
Very good. Very good. And we're looking forward to your next book coming out, the Bottom Line book, I guess I would call that, right?
I'll take that title under advisement, Bottom Line.
Well, yeah, I didn't mean to suggest that, but I'm a bottom line, kind of guy. So I just like, just tell me what to do. Tell me what to do. Give me the list. I need the list. I gotta look for the list. Yeah. And by the way, throw a pen in there too, so I can check things off. But and $100 bill so I can buy it.
My bag's full of coffee, Joe.
Yeah.
That's all I carry.
Well, it does have coffee. Seriously, does have trading value, and even if you don't drink it, there will be same with alcohol, folks. Too, you not drink Jim Beam or whatever the alcohol is, but it does have barter value. So, hey, there you go. But Frank, it's been a pleasure. Our time together has been a pleasure. Our phone banks went out, so right after Rocco, I think Rocco might have had something to do with that. Our phone banks went out.
Yeah, we were having some sound issues during that time. I don't know. It would all be on the archive though. Uninterrupted.
Yeah.
Rocco sounded like he was enough of a technical guy to pull that off, to be honest.
I really think he had his finger on that red button, and he knocked us off. But now, you know what? I hope you stop back because we'd like to revisit this topic again at some point in the future. You've been a wonderful guest, and I thank you for your time tonight, Frank. My goodness, your book, and folks, I got to tell you, his book, Emergency Air. Grab a copy while you still can. There's a lot of information in there. And I was surprised as I looked through this how simple some of the solutions are. And if I can do it, you can do it. Frank, God bless you, my friend. Thanks for being on the Hagmann and Hagmann Report.
Doug, Joe, thank you. I appreciate being with you. Take care.
Hey, take care now. That was Frank
Bohan.
I'll tell you what, man.
Yes, excellent book. I look forward to reading it. I've only looked through it. I have not read all of it yet. I've only read all of the chapter titles.
I got to tell you, when you get to page 28, though, seriously, when you get to page 28 and there's a picture of the shop vac in there with the HEPA filter, and I go back to my situation where, I had a shop vac and I had to buy one of the sleeve things that you have to replace from time to time, and I bought the HEPA filter because that was the only thing that was on the shelf, but anyway, I noticed the difference when I was using the shop vac because before there would be little particles coming out, like little dust thingies. I don't even know how to describe it, but you know how you get that blowback from the shop vacs. I put that HEPA filter on there, and I'll tell you what, the only thing that was coming out of there was air. And I mean air, that's it. So to see this on page 28 of his book, Emergency Air, I've got to tell you, boy, simple, and I would never thought about it. So,
well, we're closing out this final minutes of the show. I want to hit on this story real quick. Obama offends Catholics in the UK, says religious schools are divisive. The Catholic media is up in arms over comments President Obama made during a speech while in Northern Ireland for the G8 summit. Obama made what is described as an alarming call to end Catholic education, in spite of the fact that it is considered a critical component of the church. In front of an audience of about 2,000 young people, including many Catholics, Obama claimed the Catholic education divides people and blocks peace, according to the Scottish Catholic Observer. Let me say something here, Obama. Giving AK-47 small arms, shoulder-fire rocket missiles to the Al-Qaeda forces that are allegedly to have attacked us on 9/11, that blocks peace pretty much too. Droning your fellow man, no matter what country they're in, isn't a good way to go about attaining peace.
Well, I think that came up in a conversation. I don't know which pundit was talking about that, about droning other countries and expecting them to respond by saying, well, it's okay, everything's, we love America. Obviously, there's a larger agenda here, folks, at play. I have to look at this as, and I think you do too, Joe, look at this as, Obama did either he lied during his campaign in 2007/8, or either he lied then or he's lying now, or both. I mean, what is it? Because he said he was going to close Guantanamo. He wasn't going to extend the wars. I mean, he was going to end the wars. He was not going to sign on to. And I'm kind of making a comparison, about the NDAA and stuff like that. Yet he has. He's done everything he said he wouldn't do. So, puppet
He's
string.
a liar, and
what?
He knew what he was doing. He knew what he was getting into. Maybe not to the extent that he'd have to do all these things that he's told, but he knew what he was getting into. He lied from the start. He's lying now. If anything. If he really wanted to save himself, meaning save his soul, he could just come out and tell the American people the truth.
Well,
I've been in this office for 5 years now, and
would we have
a not mine.
Scenario? And something I got to tell you, Joe. I was talking to a couple of different people who brought up this situation, and I am getting more and more worried about this. And this is not a threat. I'm not talking to people that know anything more than I do, okay? But I've been talking with people who say, I have a feeling this guy's not going to finish out his term, or I have a feeling he's going to be our last president, meaning things are going to change so much that, he will not necessarily be necessary. I just have this funny feeling based on the people and others who I've spoken with that the powers are behind him, are done with him. Does that make sense to you, Joe?
Yeah, it does, and it goes along with some of the things we've heard from a few other people on and off air. How that would happen is a whole nother scenario. And this is stuff tomorrow night. We're going to have to go over some of the stuff in the first hour because I don't want to get into this right now as we're closing out. But we will be joined by Scott of Omega Man News Radio on BTR. He also has a book, the Omega Man Manifesto.
Holy cow, folks.
And I was on his show. And he's going to be coming on tomorrow with us for the second hour. And it's going to be a really good show. It's his book, The Omega Man Manifesto, is a great book, and it touches on so much of what we talk about, the Illuminati controlling, the different ways they control, the evil behind them, who it is. It's going to be a great show tomorrow, so don't miss it.
I know you don't want to bring this up as we're closing out, but did you see the speech he gave in Germany? We referenced it earlier today.
Yeah, 200,000 people.
But behind that security glass.
The 8-inch security glass, like the size of your glasses.
Oh man, but real, yeah. What does that say? I mean, really, what does that say? And
I've never seen him have one of those bulletproof shield things in front of him before. I mean, I think one time maybe I did, but not on regular occurrences.
But folks, also too, I'd like to direct your attention to his and to others equating him to Abe Lincoln. There's this apparent affinity in relationship. This odd, very, very, very odd situation with Abe Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, and of course how he met his fate. And of course, there's with Obama and Michelle about the return to Camelot, referencing Jack Kennedy. We know what happened there. Again, I have a bad feeling, that's not to say I know anything, because I don't. But I just have a bad feeling about this. I really, really do. But that's a story for another time, I suppose. But with that, ladies and gentlemen, invested another 3 hours of your time with the Hagmanns, and I want to thank each and every one of you.
And I want to thank you for really keeping up on that show. I got telling people in the chat, I got a stuffy nose. I'm not feeling it right now, and you really kept that interview going.
I poisoned you intentionally.
Oh, that explains it.
Yeah. No, and sometimes I'll tell you what, we've talked about this too. You get fatigued. There's this stress that's just so, and everyone's going through this.